It says it's common to heat the crystals before cutting them to intensify the orange color. So they're literally taking something else and they're baking it to get it to be citrine colored. That's what they're doing. And they're saying it like it's citrine from the second you take it out of the ground. Look at this. Citrine is pinkish red when it's first exposed. So they're just telling you it's citrine from beginning to end, which is what we've seen with like all these other jewelers who say, yeah, citrine comes from amethyst and sometimes smoky quartz. And that's not what citrine is. That's not real citrine at all. And so they say most citrine is formed by heating up purple amethyst, and citrine may be produced by heat treating smoky quartz from certain localities. And I think that that's really telling of like just how widespread this disinformation has become, because there are like really reputable sources here that go into like the chemical compositions and the qualities and all that, and have like a large kind of information repository type website say this kind of stuff. So I think that it's time to bring awareness back to the fact that it's not real citrine, um, because the chemical composition isn't the same. Just because it looks like it doesn't mean it is it. Hello and welcome to the second half of the discussion involving citrine and the fakes that are out there on the market. Today we're covering the two trickier and more prevalent ones, which are smoky quartz and amethyst. And if you couldn't tell by the introduction clips here, there's a lot of issues with amethyst and smoky quartz. And we're going to get into them because I think enough is enough. And if you really want natural citrine, you should be able to buy it with confidence and not be worried that the market is lying to you or doesn't understand what real citrine actually is. So if you want to check out why I would recommend getting real citrine for metaphysical purposes, or energy work, you can check the first part of this fake citrine discussion. I'll have it linked down below. Very quick, like summary on why is because the chemical composition of the crystals, the amount of atoms and the types of atoms within the crystal lattice does change how a crystal vibrates. And when you change the vibrations that these crystals have, you'll change the properties and the energies that they can give you and you can utilize. So if you're getting a fake that's glass, which has essentially none to little metaphysical properties, that's more of like an easy example to see why we wouldn't like that. Amethyst, even though it's a crystal, and smoky quartz, even though it's a crystal, have different metaphysical uses. So even if you fake the colors to get them to look closer to citrine, it's still an issue. And by fake colors, you'll see what I mean here, but essentially when you heat up other crystals so that their color changes, it changes the color and it changes some of the bonds of the atoms within like the amethyst or the smoky quartz, but it doesn't change the chemical composition. So even when they're different colors, they'll still vibrate differently than citrine. They'll still give off different energies than citrine. So that's the problem that I have with this. So let's get into it. I want to move on to this website called crystals.eu. We're in their blogs section here, specifically under the citrine section. And what I want to talk about from this blog is that they do a good job mentioning there's a couple different varieties of citrine. So what they're talking about down here is that for the heat treated citrine, citrine that's heat treated is actually amethyst or smoky quartz that has been baked at higher temperatures to alter their colors. We'll talk about smoky quartz first, and then we'll talk about amethyst second. One thing that I think is very perhaps disingenuous, or at the very least wildly misleading, is calling it heat treated citrine. So one thing you'll see, and you especially will see this in the community surrounding jewelry, is that heat treated citrine is a term that now is largely accepted as what you call amethyst or smoky quartz that has been baked to the point where its color changes. What I'm thinking this is basically like a marketing ploy by large jewelers, because if you call something heat treated amethyst or altered smoky quartz or like baked amethyst, it doesn't ring as authentic citrine because it has a different name. It started as a different crystal. So the jewelers coined this term to call heat treated citrine another crystal that was altered to look like citrine. And now this is a widely accepted term. You'll see it in like a whole bunch of blogs. I'll walk through a couple of them with you. But I believe that this is a term just to make people feel more comfortable that their citrine is actually citrine. It's not a modification of another crystal. And just because of that intention behind the term heat treated citrine, I think that it's like disingenuous and like kind of tricky. And I wanted to point that out here because there are a lot of resources, including like other blogs and most jewelers, that will tell you like, oh, it's just heat treated citrine, but it's still citrine, it's fine. And like some people will go as far as to tell you citrine comes from amethyst. And I think a lot of that is because this has been going on for so long now. I have some timestamps of it that we'll look at, or some dates that we'll look at. But this has been going on for so long that people are starting to believe some of like the new gem stores and new jewelers that are coming into the market and new customers. They're actually starting to believe that citrine comes from baking amethyst and smoky quartz. Like they don't think that it came out of the ground first. Like citrine used to be more expensive than topaz to the point where people would write topaz off as citrine, as fakes, because citrine was so sought after and so rare and so valuable that people were trying to find fakes left and right to gain more than they should have in the market. And that's why we started baking amethyst and smoky quartz to begin with, because someone figured out if you heat amethyst up a lot, then it'll go from purple to this amber color and it looks kind of like citrine. And not only that, but we'll say it's better citrine because it's a richer color. And like that's where this whole market evolved from. And the jewelers have been doing a really good job of trying to normalize this. And one of the ways that they're normalizing it is by using this heat treated citrine lingo. And it's working. Like we're at the point where people actually think that it's normal for amethyst or for citrine to come from amethyst. And like if you like a richer, deeper amber colored citrine, which a lot of people do. That's why jewelers have done this so extensively, and brag about how like deep colored their citrines are. You know, I don't have anything against that, and like if you enjoy that, go for it. But my issue comes from amethyst vibrates at different frequencies than citrine. So if you want to use these for metaphysical work, a baked amethyst will not give you the same energies as a citrine will, and you should be able to easily go purchase authentic citrine and not worry about if it's baked amethyst. Unfortunately, we're not at that point, and there is a lot of fakes out there that are going around still. Um, and I want to talk about that because I think as a buyer, you should be able to get what you paid money for and not be like conned or scammed or lied to. And sometimes it's not the supplier. Sometimes the person you're buying the crystals from, they have been misinformed by the mines. So sometimes the baking of the amethyst actually happens at the mines that they get it from. And so the miners will be kind of scummy or not understand that that means it's different because of this heat treated citrine lingo, and they will tell your suppliers like, hey, yeah, this is citrine. This is authentic citrine. And your supplier may not understand that it's not natural citrine, it's baked amethyst or it's baked smoky quartz. And so they'll tell you this is citrine because they trust the mines that they're getting this from or the distributor that they're getting it from. And so it's not always whoever you're buying the crystal from is being malicious. It could be multiple levels of misunderstandings because people are new and learning. And this heat treated citrine thing didn't happen overnight. It's been going on for like 70 plus years now, and we'll talk about that. But this is like the biggest reason why I waited to talk about this until now is because if we didn't have people who wanted natural crystals and sought after them for collections and energy work, I don't think that this topic of defining what's natural citrine versus heat treated citrine would even be as big of a thing it is now to where we could talk about it. Like I think that the jewelers would have completely like hidden the fact that citrine does originate from like a natural source in the ground, and now we're faking it more than we're actually grabbing real citrine. I think that that fact would be completely hidden. So it's actually really nice that there's a community of people who want the authentic things so that there's still awareness brought to this through it. And we're going to talk about smoky quartz first, and then we'll talk about amethyst. Really quickly, I just want to mention amethyst and smoky quartz are both also variations of quartz, which means they have the same silica dioxide main structure that they're built off of, which means they have similar structures to that of citrine. So, like when we were talking about, you can see the difference between citrine and topaz just based on how the specimens grow and arrange themselves. It's in a way a little bit harder to do that when we're talking about smoky quartz versus citrine because this pet specimen here, it's not in a cluster, it doesn't have a white root. So aside from the colorations that it has, it's hard to just on a structure standpoint know that this isn't citrine because they're carved to have very similar structures. The important part to note here is that yes, smoky quartz can be heated up, and when you heat it up, it will take on a color that looks more like that of citrine. So it goes from like this brown or sometimes grayish color that it's famous for, and it will take on more of a yellow hue. But just like I've been saying, this blog also agrees, this vendor also agrees that it doesn't have the same energy. And that's because, on a fundamental level, smoky quartz has a different chemical composition. So just to give credit, this blog is the Amethyst Goddess again. Now we're back to mindat.org and we're on their smoky quartz page now. So there are three big iconic pictures of smoky quartz here just to give you a good representation. They have structures very close to quartz. Smoky quartz can grow in clusters though. So if someone's trying to pass off like a heat treated or lighter version of smoky quartz for citrine, if it's in a cluster, you can have like a better idea of knowing that it's probably not genuine citrine. But a lot of smoky quartz that does get baked will be cut down into like faceted crystals that's inlaid in jewelry, or it'll be in that obelisk form or something else that you've seen before. So the coloration can be helpful. I will say that I think amethyst, if we're talking about raw crystals and specimens, amethyst is more often identified as citrine fakes than smoky quartz, and it gets a lot more attention in the market. So it's harder to know like how prevalent fake smoky quartz is just because it's less famous. And I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that amethyst is just in it's presenting itself as so much more abundance in the market these days, and that just has to do with the amount of it available and like the ease that we've been able to get it like from the mines relative to smoky quartz based on how many mines there are and how like profitable and prolific like all of these different mines are. So we might see a fluctuation in more or less smoky quartz fakes over the years, but I wanted to bring it up now anyway. When we talk about what gives smoky quartz its color, it does get a lot of it from aluminum, and there's a process that shapes the aluminum to have this, but what we see is that aluminum can integrate itself within the crystal matrix, and then based on what energies have hit this crystal while it was forming, so the different heats, the amount of aluminum, the amount of irradiation that this crystal has gone under while it was forming and after it was formed, will dictate how rich and how dark and how brown to gray toned the color will be. Because it has a different chemical composition than citrine, you'll see that it will give off different energies if you're using it for energy work or metaphysical uses. I do want to also briefly mention here that smoky quartz is more likely to have inclusions than citrine. So all of these fragments here that are embedded within the crystals, those are more likely to occur in smoky quartz than citrine. And I think that just because a crystal has an inclusion doesn't mean it is or isn't a certain thing generally. Like sometimes stuff just happens, and crystals are interesting in that every single one is unique. So sometimes citrine could have an inclusion in it, and that doesn't invalidate it. But if you're looking at a supplier who has like a whole lot of citrines and all of them have multiple inclusions, there's a really good chance that it could be heat treated smoky quartz rather than citrine, just because citrine doesn't famously have like many inclusions in it. And just because smoky quartz doesn't have an inclusion doesn't mean that it's not smoky quartz. So like you have to take that with a grain of salt, but it can help you understand if you want to apply more skepticism to a situation. I want to continue on and talk about heat treated amethyst. I know the smoky quartz section was pretty quick, but that's because it really is difficult to discern what is heat treated smoky quartz versus citrine outside of very critically looking at the color and asking your supplier like where it came from. So citrine is usually found in specific areas or specific mines, and you should be able to like get those references and look those up, or you should be able to, like, if your supplier isn't going to be like transparent with you or you don't trust them, maybe that's a sign that you could ask for like other resources from them. But citrine is pretty famously known for coming out of areas like Brazil and South America, as well as certain parts of Africa. And not saying citrine hasn't been found anywhere else, but those are the most common sites of it right now. So if someone's telling you that they're obtaining their citrine from somewhere else that's like very prevalent for having a lot of smoky quartz, then that's something that, along with assessing the color of the crystal itself, might steer you in the right direction of wanting to make your purchases elsewhere. Determining whether or not your citrine is heated smoky quartz is going to be a little bit trickier than if it's amethyst, and that just comes with us figuring out like a buyer's standpoint on an individual basis what's going on. But it doesn't seem like smoky quartz is being fenced as often as amethyst. That doesn't mean it's not, and I don't know if it's happening more in the jeweler community than the raw crystal community. It's just something to be aware of rather than, I guess, like be paranoid about. Like I'm not trying to put distrust and doubt into all these wonderful suppliers out there that you may be getting like crystals from for your collection. It's just like if you're meeting a new supplier, or you're making a one-off purchase at a gem show somewhere, maybe some skepticism being employed can save you from being disappointed in the future, and I hope that in some way this is helpful. The only thing I've really been able to speak to or find about smoky quartz, besides the inclusions and the fact that they can show up in clusters even after they're heat treated, is that smoky quartz will still have a little bit of that like smokier appearance to it generally when it's trying to be sold as citrine, and I don't know if that's just because like it's not being heated in a way to get rid of all of it, or if people aren't heating it at all and they're just trying to tell you it's smoky citrine, which I have seen before. You know, those can be moments where you may want to think about it. And it's not that there isn't smoky citrine out there. It's just that sometimes if you're getting it from a supplier that's a little bit shadier, you might want to be careful. So if you want to hear more about that, email us, which is in our video description, or leave a comment and I'll get on making a specific video about what happens when you heat up smoky quartz and what that looks like. The bigger, more prevalent one that we've seen though is amethyst. So let's talk about that because it's like a whole can of worms here. And I have this first website by the spiritual gemologist. Uh, this is like one of their little articles, so essentially a blog. Amethyst can be heated up to produce a different array of colors. Now, amethyst at low temperatures, when it forms, will be that purple color that is iconic for it. As you heat it up, it will slowly transition into darker, more amber shades of the yellow, and then it will transition into more of that like lighter yellow, the straw yellow, the pale yellows. And if you heat it up super high, it can actually turn either green or into what they call neon quartz over here, which has more of like a clear or like lavender-esque hue to it. So this website does say here, and I did want to like be aware of this. It may very well also be the lavender quartz, quote unquote, we often see in the market. And I'm not saying that isn't true, but generally, when you see lavender quartz in the market, it's rose quartz that has been coated with cobalt. And that cobalt being blue in color, when the light shines through it, it'll hit blue and then the pink rose quartz under it, and those two colors combined will be perceived as lavender. So a lot of times lavender quartz generally won't be neon quartz, and you can see that when you look at lavender quartz, because lavender quartz usually is like more on the opaque side. It doesn't ring true like this neon quartz does. So, you know, you might find it out there being called lavender quartz. I just think lavender quartz has evolved into a coated variety of rose quartz at this point, and that's what like the market grabbed hold of pretty well. But when you heat up amethyst, it can go through like a wide array of colors, and they're related to the degree of heat. So they'll go from like dark yellow to like more of this pale thing, and sometimes green, which is called this prasoilite here, and I think that's a lot less commonly talked about. That's the summary of how this works. To put more credibility behind this, I do have this publication from Nature, which, for those of you who don't know, Nature is like one of the big publishers of scientific articles. They'll cover everything from like cancer treatments to cellular functions to how plants work and how to grow crops, all the way down to different effects of gemstones and things. So what you'll see here in this article is the researchers actually broke down like at what temperatures amethyst will start to shift colors. And I'm not gonna like break down the whole thing for you or read the whole article. I'll have it linked. It's pretty long and really dense. But what it essentially talks about here is there are temperature thresholds at which you will see the amethyst start to shift colors. that becomes important for a couple reasons. One of which being, as we talk about heating up amethyst and that transitioning into citrine, the heat treated citrine, you can actually hit an in between point where the amethyst will start to shift and some of it will change color and other points won't. So you get this little like hybrid chimera of like purple and yellowy hues in the same cluster or specimen, and that's called ametrine. So for those of you who know about ametrine, sometimes it is just a baked version of amethyst, and there are like rare instances where I believe it can occur naturally depending on at what conditions the amethyst formed underground. But generally, ametrine is like a baked version of amethyst when it's marketed in a way to where a large specimen is like super patchy or something. So I just wanted to bring that to your attention that like there are ametrine fakes out there too, um, as well as like maybe some real ones, but that might be something you wanna approach with skepticism as well if you're interested in having the authentic deals rather than just like aesthetics. But if aesthetics is your thing, then you don't have to worry about any of this. Yeah, the last thing I wanted to mention about this article, and I think this is really telling about how our understanding of citrine has changed over the years since it became popular, is the last sentence says a more appropriate heating temperature to obtain citrine by heating amethyst is about 560 degrees. The temperature part I'm not super worried about, but it's the fact that it's so normalized to say heating amethyst gives you citrine. It makes citrine. You obtain citrine from it. I think that's really telling of where we are with how normalized it is to get fake citrine from amethyst in classifying that as genuine citrine at this point. And this is part of what you have to be really careful with if you're interested in obtaining the genuine, natural, like from the earth citrine as opposed to baked amethyst, because again, they're going to have like different vibrations and metaphysical properties. But it's so normalized that some people out there like they won't understand it the same way as you if they haven't done the research, and that can lead to a lot of confusion. We're back to the Jewelers of America website here. I wanted to point out once again we're back to these their example, right? These have a much richer, more orange hued color than we've seen with a lot of the natural citrines. And I wanted to point that out now because you can start to see how there's this branching of interest between the jewelers and the crystal collectors or energy workers that want natural citrine, because it's actually sought after for a lot of people interested in jewelry to have these darker, richer colors, whereas avid crystal collectors and like those wanting the natural raw specimens, even though this color might be interesting to us, um, we see that it's more important for the crystal to be genuine than to be a prettier color. So there's a little bit of a divide here, and I'm not saying everyone interested in jewelry or jewelers don't want the authentic thing, but there's been like a large push for having richer colors of citrine because it does look a little bit flashier and grabbier to certain people. But there are still people out there who want the citrine they have in their jewelry to be authentic because it is like more valuable to them to have that authenticity. Highlighted down here is that again there's this real push from big jewelers to tell you that citrine's real if it comes from baking amethyst. Like it's not amethyst, it's authentic, genuine citrine, even though it's not the same thing that comes out of the ground. And it's been going on for so long that like now people are starting to believe it, like we saw with the scientific article and like we'll see with other blogs later. So right here they just blatantly tell you most citrines start out as amethysts and then they're heat treated to turn this yellow reddish orange. And what they're doing here I think is really deceptive because they're telling you by saying just the phrase most citrines, they're not discrediting the citrines that come out of the ground, but they're adding all the credibility in the world to the fact that these citrines are being faked and it's fine. And that's a lot of what's on the market, even from like these big, very nice, authentic like jewelers. Their citrine doesn't feel authentic to me because I think authentic citrine means it has the chemical composition that classifies it as citrine. But they've been doing this for so long that they're comfortable just telling you, no, 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 citrine is baked amethyst, it's fine. And I think that that can be really dangerous because we're seeing that carried out through a new, younger generations of crystal collectors and jewelers and miners and crystal distributors. So now some people simply don't understand there's a difference and they think baked amethyst, which looks very different from normal citrine, we'll look at that in a second, they think that they're both citrine and it's fine. So if you care about it, again, you might have to turn certain sellers down or deny your business to them because they don't understand what they have isn't authentic. They think it is, even though it's a different chemical composition and vibrates differently. And so, even though they don't call it fake because they've been spending over 70 years coining the terms that make it sound real, I still think because it's not natural and it doesn't have the right chemical composition to classify it as citrine, baked amethyst is fake citrine. That's how it started. It started fake. They started by baking it and telling no one. And we'll see that in a second. I think it becomes really clear. So they tell you any treatments should be disclosed to the buyer here, but they don't tell you the treatments mean they're changing one crystal to mock another crystal, to imitate another crystal. And furthermore, because they couldn't get amethyst to have the exact same, the baked amethyst to have the same straw yellow as citrine, they said, oh, it's prettier, it's more vibrant, it's more orange, this is actually better, like it stands out more, look how much more stunning it is. And I think that somewhere along the way people started like agreeing with them and saying, yeah, it is more beautiful and we do want that more. And here we are with um, baked amethyst being just blatantly called citrine, genuine citrine. We're back to mindat.org. They're a great resource. They have really reputable, transparent resources from like gemologists and geologists that they get their information from. So I recommend them if you want to like look up any crystals. But here are their examples of amethyst. You can see how rich and dark the purples are. You can see that they also have the ability, if they're like very high quality and special specimens, to vary their colors and the deposition of the colors. Now, amethyst being a quartz has that same silica dioxide crystal structure that they build off of. So in a way, they do have the same structures as citrine in that like the points have that same classic look of the flat sides and like the slightly larger degreed angle points that make points that usually consist of like 6 or more faces here. Usually it's 6. But they tend to grow in like clusters or like these more closer akin to geode like pockets. So that can be a big giveaway is if you have these clusters that are yellow instead because they were baked. Now amethyst gets its color from iron, and these irons will integrate themselves into the crystal lattice so they can like bond with the oxygens instead of the silicon, and and that's what causes the purple colors when the iron deposits at lower temperatures, like that other paper, the nature paper we looked at talks about. At certain temperature thresholds, and I love this picture because I think this is really telling, at certain temperature thresholds, if you bake it, it will turn to this more ambery color. And I believe, I may be wrong, but I believe this is because the amethyst color largely or solely comes from like the significant determining factor in its color is the iron that's integrated within it. Whereas citrine has iron and aluminum play a large role. Just like we saw, the yellow color in topaz is usually from aluminum. So the reason when you bake amethyst, you don't get that same straw yellow color, you get something more amber-esque or has like more of these darker orange hues in it, is because there's a lot of iron and that's it. So like the levels of iron in it are different from citrine most likely, and there's no other significant pigmentation to dull down that orange. I believe that's why amethyst comes across as like a different color. So if you're interested in getting real citrine and not baked amethyst, then what you'll see is that eventually you'll get really good at understanding this is too amber or too brown or too orange. I think that something is wrong here, like some kind of other crystal has been baked. So this kind of quadrant down here that's yellow does a good job of showing that. Up here, in this other quadrant, amethyst has been baked again, but at different temperatures. And this is more of that like that neon quartz that we saw in the other reference, where a lot of the pigmentation begins to get lost. I do want to say, for those of you that are interested in this, the yellow process, the yellowing from being exposed to high temperatures, the reason the iron turns yellow is because the iron itself oxidates, and so the bonds change slightly, and that has the colors change. So it may be that you find in your energy or metaphysical uses for amethyst, you realize that normal amethyst may give off different energies to you than the baked amethyst, but it also may not because perhaps the change isn't significant enough for you to be sensitive to it. So it could be different for everyone out there. And as a collector, you might find that it's useful to have like both of these, and they might react with you differently, but it's going to be different for everyone. Something else that's interesting is if you irradiate the baked amethyst, you will deoxidize the iron molecules, and you can actually revert the color back to the dark purple again. So this is like a reversible process. It's not changing the chemical composition of the amethyst to change the color, but you're still changing the bonds enough and where the electrons are dispersed enough to have a change in the color. And since the bonds are different, the vibrations can be different. So either way, it's still not citrine, but you might find it useful to have both types of amethyst if you're sensitive to them, or you like one more than the other. You're partial to one over the other. This last quadrant down here in this picture is showing that if you bake amethyst enough, um, and you can, right before you hit like total color ablation, you can pale out the color quite significantly and you get something more akin to being like lavendery or rose-esque. The only thing they really don't show in this picture that we've discussed from other resources is that sometimes amethyst will turn green instead. This is a good example of the druzy amethyst and how it can form in these clusters that line certain pockets. This is because as the layers of the earth kind of churn and the hot things will raise to then cool down, if there are large air pockets in those different molten layers, as they cool, the inside can actually stay hollow as an air bubble. Then depending on the sediment around it and any like water or liquid that could drain into that bubble, if it has like a high amount of silica, it can bond with the oxygen in that air bubble, and so you get crystals forming from all surfaces within that air bubble inwards. And that's why a lot of amethyst shows up in like these like pockets or indented tubes and whatnot. But citrine won't form this way. So if you see like a large cluster that's yellow colored or citrine S colored, it's not citrine. The last thing I want to point out on this website here is I think that this sentence is very telling of the fact that the the split between gemologists, crystal collectors, people interested in natural crystals, and jewelers is like very apparent. So jewelers will tell you baking amethyst is citrine, and most citrine starts that way, which is their way of telling you be okay with our products in the market that we have available to you because this is where we get most of our stuff. Whereas here, if we have a community that's largely backed by collectors and gemologists, they'll tell you it's often incorrectly sold as citrine. So there is a disagreement here, and I'm not impartial to it. In case it hasn't been clear yet, I do think baking amethyst and selling it as citrine is incorrect. You're mislabeling that crystal because it does have different vibrations and metaphysical properties. We're back to Sosna gems and jewelry. So it's nice that they are, or that the jeweler community is transparent with their treatments. They're trying to build trust. The problem is they're marketing those treatments as being authentic, as passing off one crystal as another, even though they're not the same thing. You just made one look like the other. But uh, down here at the bottom, they're talking about how the vast majority of citrine, which is marketed, is produced by heating Smoky quartz, which produces light to medium yellows, and amethyst, which is the stronger yellowy oranges to like the amber shades. So Smoky quartz can be a little harder to identify um, in different like cut jewels because it produces yellows that aren't as orange or ambery, and that's because the Smoky quartz has aluminum within it. That's my belief on this. So we're seeing another example of how they're like large jewelers are perpetuating what they want you to think, which is citrine is authentic if it's just baked amethyst. The other thing I want to bring up really quickly is that they give a little history of where citrine uh, generally comes from. I want you to take this with a grain of salt because these guys will tell you citrine is amethyst, so they're gonna lump like citrine and amethyst mines together most likely. If you want to know like the active mines for citrine, you can Google it pretty quickly. Or if you want me to do that in another video, you can let me know. I'll do it for you, and we can talk about it and have fun. But I wanted to bring this up because they tell you these are some of the places where it's actively being mined right now. So Brazil, Madagascar are a lot of the big ones. Like South America and Africa are kind of like the big ones. But there's some other ones in certain mountains and around Europe. What I really like that they do, though, is that they tell you historically there have been sources of it in other areas. And I think that's important to keep in mind here because, like, do new veins in mines and new mining areas are being discovered, you know, all over the world over time, and sometimes they get exhausted so they won't have anything, or sometimes they won't turn out stuff for a while and then it'll come back. And so just because a supplier says that they got something from somewhere else, there's like a new mine that opened up, doesn't mean that they're being disingenuous um, or lying. It could really be that there's a new mine somewhere. But if you're seeing citrine getting sourced from somewhere really strange, like I don't know, Iceland, um, you wanna approach it with a little bit more skepticism because that's generally not where it's from. So they may be fencing one crystal as another in that case, or it may be a fake and they're just trying to give it like an exotic place where they think it'll sound authentic. Not saying that Iceland will never have citrine one day, it's just not famous for that. So it's something to be aware of as the crystal market like evolves over time here. This is Diamond Rensu's website here. This is one of their blogs, and they're talking about some of the differences between heat treated amethyst and citrine. I think this example is really telling. So the iron gives it like more of that like reddish orangish hue, and here the citrine is pretty pale in comparison. This is an image of faceted stones, so you can really see the desirable differences in colors that a lot of jewelers want you to see. So what's interesting is that right here they're very clearly telling you this is amethyst and this is heat treated uh, amethyst, but they're giving you this by telling you, hey, this is citrine on the right. So they're doing that same gimmick that these jewelers want you to buy into, which is that when you heat treat amethyst and you get this rich orangish tone that we see up here, it's authentic citrine. This is a good example of showing a difference between heat treated amethyst and citrine. So we can see the more amber orange-ish color of the baked amethyst. There's also the white root around it that citrine doesn't have. This is indicative of like a quartz cluster or an amethyst cluster in some way. Over here we see more of like an even distribution of color. There's no white roots, and the color isn't so like orange hued. It's a little paler, which is more of what we see when we're talking about the natural forms of citrine. The last thing I want to mention about this website, and this isn't to like attack anybody or anything, but I think that these examples they have down here for comparing heat treated stones to natural stones paints a really good picture of the jeweler's intentions for why they've spent so much time and energy like convincing the market over decades that baked amethyst is citrine. It's genuinely citrine when it's not. And aside from citrine being way more rare than amethyst and being very sought after for a long time, uh, which led to a really big like demand and want for these things. So fakes are more likely to happen in those cases, and that's what happened. Because there was just like so much monetary gain to get from it. What we also see here is that the jewelers are trying to convince you that like not only is baked amethyst authentic, but it's also better than the natural citrine. And so they're very careful about not telling you it's fake citrine. They're heat treated stones. They won't even say the word citrine here. But they tell you that, for example, if we go to clarity here, heat treatment can reduce visibility of inclusions and improve overall clarity. And then they say over here, clarity is a result of the natural conditions during crystal growth with inclusions and blemishes present. Any diligent, like well experienced master crafter that carves and facets crystals into like beautiful stones that are going to be inlaid in jewelry, they won't carve in a way to where the crystal has an inclusion in it unless it's on purpose, like you're getting carved like moss agate or something. Um, so the way that they're shaping this here, even though they're technically being transparent, is they're giving you the implication of if you get a heat treated stone, it's clearer and it's more beautiful and it's better. And over here they're saying, oh, if you get a natural stone, like it might have inclusions, it could have blemishes, like we don't know and we can't help it. And it's like every jeweler does help it. Like they don't sell stones that are imperfect for a lot of money. They cut stones quite beautifully and they use sections of it that are beautiful, and that's why we grade stones from like triple A's and down, and usually the triple A ones are synonymous to gem grade stones, and they call it that for a reason. Like you can get gem grade amethyst, you can get gem grade rose quartz, and it's because like those are still natural stones, but they're being utilized, and the sections of them that are utilized are the ones that don't have blemishes. And I think it's a little disingenuous because even though heat treating may reduce the visibility of things, I haven't ever seen it realistically significantly reduce it, and that could be from my lack of experience, but like amethyst is still a stone that's going to have blemishes. So like either they're going to heat treat the thing and use the parts of it that don't have imperfections, or they're going to pick a piece that doesn't have imperfections to heat treat and then carve. But you can kind of see like throughout this, if you explore this page on your own or you pause the screen to read it, that they've moved beyond telling you baked amethyst is genuine citrine, and now they're trying to tell you that the fake citrine is actually better and you want it. And I think that that comes across with the intentions of like why they're doing this to begin with, so they can charge citrine level prices for this stuff or close to it, but it's easier for them to get a hold of it much cheaper, and that allows them to like have more to sell to people, so they have like better inventory at cheaper prices and better profits. And then down here they'll tell you too, like, oh well, natural citrine is relatively rare. um and so it's not great to have, but like that's what had it be sought after in the first place when it was discovered, was that it was really rare. So it was a point of like pride and prestige if you could have it, just like most luxury items. And now they're trying to like drive the market a different way, so here, more affordable and widely available. It's really disingenuous and damaging to tell people that baked amethyst is citrine. So we have another blog here. This is the Unearthed Gemstones. And we're circling back to it because we're finally getting around to this picture they have of baked amethyst. So this is like a pretty classic version of what you can see if you're buying like a specimen of citrine and someone's trying to sell you a fake, regardless or not of if they understand it is fake. So there's the white root, and then there's a cluster of smaller points, and those points have like very ambery, very orangish hues attached to them. We can see it again in this one. This one has like a much darker hue to it, but there's still a cluster of smaller points. There's the white root here, and then amethyst can have a lot of like layers and lines within them. So we're actually seeing one of those right here before we go back to like more white root and then the end of this specimen at the bottom. One thing I'll mention for those of you that are interested about this, or some specimens or jewelry you may have, is you can always find a professional to get to assess your pieces. Or I think that the differences between amethyst and citrine, if we're talking about the raw versions of these crystals themselves, are apparent enough to where most of you won't feel the need to go find a gemologist. But if you really want to be sure, that's always an option you have available to you. The next resource I want to bring you to is this website by the Citrine Circle here. This is one of their blogs, but they have some good pictures here. I know they're asking which one is photoshopped, but this is a really good example of what you'll find on some websites that sell just about everything. So like if you go to things like Temu or Shein or Wish or Amazon, stuff like that, you'll find stuff that looks pretty similar to this, even though, you know, one of these is photoshopped, where there will be these points that are colored, but the color doesn't extend down very far. So it's not even like the whole point is amber and there's the white root. It'll be like there's this dark colored point that lightens out into nothing, and then you'll get the white root under a clear section. And they always come in like these like bulky clusters because I guess it sells better. Maybe it feels more substantial or impressive to the people that want something like this. But with these having color that's only in the point, it's also very likely that these actually aren't citrine or amethyst at all. They're lab grown crystals. And so I can do another video on lab grown crystals in the future. I guess this is a good reminder for that. But lab grown crystals will usually have the color not dispersed very far down. It'll be deposited at the ends, and then they'll be on like this large kind of flat base, like this thing that takes up their whole hand here. And that's a very like telltale sign that your crystal may be lab grown, is if the color is super concentrated just in the points. But either way, if you see this, like it's not real citrine. And I thought that was like a really good example of something you'll see a lot on those like bigger you can buy anything you want here at a discount type of websites. So this picture's little, but it's another good example because you can see like white roots and then color on the end. If you see that, it's not citrine regardless of what color it is. Down here, I think they do a good job of giving more examples of that. We've seen this one already, and then this one on the side here. Again, it has the coloration that isn't even all the way through because there's white and then there's amber, and that degree of amber color usually means it's not natural citrine. I think the tumbles was a good include because sometimes it's harder to tell when the stone is carved because you can't see if it came from like a cluster. But these tumbles, you can follow the same rules to assess. So if these tumbles, the color isn't even all the way through. So if the color like varies from like rich to lighter or paler, or if they have these little like white roots here that got stuck in it, this one kind of goes from like a richer yellow to a duller one. This one goes from darker to like something that looks kind of white. This is a good indication that these aren't citrine because whatever crystal they tumbled started from a chunk that had white roots. These are images of some natural citrine. So you can see generally they're like a standalone point here. This one has one little point attached to it, but it's not like a whole plate of clusters. It's not like a druzy, it's not a geode, it's not like 10 different points coming from one place. They're usually a little more solitary than that in the terms of how their points present themselves. So some of them are a little bit smokier, some of them can be pretty pale, but if you look when it's not juxtaposed to the white background here, you can see a little bit of like the yellow hue and like on the edges too. This one also is more of a pale yellow and it's a thicker specimen, so you get to see more of that color. This one does have like some cracks in it, and that's fine. Sometimes citrine does have like these imperfections within it, and that's a good thing. If it didn't have those, it might indicate that it's more of like a perfect specimen, so it could be something like glass where generally they're not made with cracks. So like if your citrine piece that you're curious about does have those, that doesn't count towards its inauthenticity, because a lot of crystals will have those. My next resource is another jeweler here. They're another example of what we've been talking about. So this is Angara, and they have a blog that's titled, "Can you tell if a citrine is real?" And then they have two pieces that are very orange, which probably means they came from baked amethyst. So if you scroll down a little bit, first they tell you what citrine is, so semi-precious stone in the quartz family. And then depending on the concentration of iron, the citrine stone can be pale yellow all the way to brownish red. And they say, well, the orange color is the color most associated with citrine. So that sentence alone kind of tells you where they're getting most of their citrine from. Now, the fact that it's orange, like from a aesthetic standpoint, I don't have an issue with. The issue I have here is that they're intentionally spreading disinformation about what citrine is, because if it's orangish, which they're telling you is okay and you should like it, it's real citrine, and it's most likely going to be baked amethyst. And I think that picture gets painted better down here at the bottom, where they say, believe it or not, the majority of citrines present on the market are actually heat treated amethyst or smoky quartz. And they're saying it like that's fine. This is just how it is. This is where it comes from. It is citrine. And I think just framing the sentence by saying it is citrine is the disingenuous thing that I've had a problem with how jewelers are marketing this. And this isn't just one jeweler, like this is everybody. And that's why I'm bringing up multiple examples of this, is because like there isn't one culprit. This is how the jeweler community has decided to move forward, and it's by trying to push that fake crystals are actually real. And because they're all doing it, people are starting to believe them. And I think that awareness should be brought to this and talked about for those of us that aren't just in it for aesthetics or getting conned into thinking we're buying like a very rare semi-precious stone. I think that like for those of us who genuinely want the real deal, um, or we want to enjoy the energetics and metaphysical properties that go along with it, we shouldn't be misled like this. So thank you to Mooncat Crystals for this. This background here is an awesome example of fake citrine. This is definitely not citrine. So you can see that from like the white roots, the multiple clusters, the points that don't have even coloration and they're more amber related. And again, we're seeing that this heat treated citrine term is becoming like wildly normalized, which I think is dangerous because it's the first step to people misunderstanding what citrine is as a whole. And so, they have natural citrine versus heat treated citrine, and they tell you like heat treated citrine, which came out of the ground as amethyst, has been treated at high colors into this orangey yellow we recognize as citrine. So I think just using the word, like the phrase heat treated citrine, and putting the quotes around heat treated instead of citrine is like part of it's a really good example of how this message has been propagated for so long that people are starting to believe it and go with it. And I'm not throwing shade at Mooncat Crystals. They've done like an excellent job with their website and their resources and their business, but I'm saying like this is part of the issue of people are starting to misunderstand what's going on and how to talk about this because of how much disinformation has been like sent to us for literal decades now. So like multiple generations of crystal enthusiasts and suppliers have been subjected to this now. And I think you can really see that confusion take hold in this sentence because this is someone who's well educated on their craft, which is having a business related to these crystals, and they're telling you that there's golden amethyst, there's heat treated citrine, and there's similar stuff. And I think that calling it golden amethyst is like an excellent way to go. So I think the fact that they're highlighting here that people are calling it heated citrine is really important because it's not heated citrine, it's baked amethyst. Like it's not citrine. And so that's where we are though, is people are starting to think that it's a thing, it's okay to call it that. It's been normalized from like this disingenuous information for so long. But this image here is a good example of what's going on with that because all of these like white root portions, those are portions that tell you that this isn't genuine natural citrine. So it's going to have a different chemical composition, vibrate differently. And if that bothers you, you should be aware of it. I do want to point out um, what Mooncat Crystals is saying down here because I think this is important to bring awareness to. So Mooncat Crystals here is asserting that because the color of the amethyst changed, it went from a deep purple to this like ambery yellow color, that the light frequency the crystal is going to give off, i.e., because it's a different color, it's emitting different frequencies back to you, which is what you pick up with your eyes, that the frequencies that are associated with the yellow orange spectrum are going to be what's associated with that crystal now when you're doing energy work. That part I do agree with, and that's why I was mentioning earlier that if you have amethyst of the non-baked, the purple variety, you may be sensitive to that variety versus the golden amethyst, the baked amethyst, because they are inherently different. Like there's a reason they give off different colors, it's because the bonds of the atoms in them have changed. However, baking the amethyst doesn't make it citrine, because there's still different atoms, there's different bonds and chemicals within natural citrine. It has aluminum, and it has it at like different ratios and quantities than amethyst. And so amethyst like lacking significant amounts of aluminum, even if you bake it and it's the same, or I wouldn't say same, even though it's a similar color to natural citrine, they're still gonna vibrate differently even if they give off similar wavelengths of light. It's the same thing as citrine has different metaphysical properties than yellow topaz. It's the same thing as like clear quartz not being the same as just clear glass. And that's why we talk about here's how to not buy fake quartz that's glass. It's because the chemical composition of these things affects their metaphysical properties as well as the colors. So you may be sensitive to normal amethyst versus the baked or heated or golden amethyst, but those will still be different from natural citrine, and I think that that should be talked about. So I do agree with them by saying that, like properties within the crystal change when you heat it, that's why the color changes. If all the properties were the same, the color wouldn't change. I agree with that. But I still think that we shouldn't normalize calling this heated amethyst citrine, and they should be regarded as different crystals because they are different. On like every level of the word, they are different and they behave different energetically. Even if heated amethyst is a closer color, they're still different. And if you want a citrine that behaves like a citrine, uh, as an informed buyer, you should be able to obtain that and not accidentally get an amethyst that looks like one. The last thing I wanted to mention from Mooncat crystals, is they have examples of genuine natural citrine points here. And you can see that the coloration is even throughout each of these points. The only time it's not is if there's a shadow that's showing through from the other side of the crystal in their hand. And they all have like that paler kind of dulled down color. Some of them do look like a little more smoky, and that could be because of like the angles of the light and the shadows, or there could be slight differences within this lot of like color variation. But in these versions that are more smoky or like shadowy, or those that are more clear, each individual piece is still uniform in color throughout. I wanted to talk about this resource, minerals.net. uh, I think generally they have a lot of good information. So, they have like the chemical structures and a lot of other pieces of information that are like very specific and add to a lot of the accountability of websites like this. But this is another example of just how normalized the large jewelers have made this this disinformation about citrine being just golden, like heated baked amethyst. And so they say most citrine is formed by heating up purple amethyst, and citrine may be produced by heat treating smoky quartz from certain localities. And I think that that's really telling of like just how widespread this disinformation has become, because there are like really reputable sources here that go into like the chemical compositions and the qualities and all that, and have like a large kind of information repository type website say this kind of stuff. So I think that it's time to bring awareness back to the fact that it's not real citrine, um, because the chemical composition isn't the same. Just because it looks like it doesn't mean it is it. They say fire citrine, which again, a whole reserved product that they labeled as citrine. They say These crystals tend to display a pinkish red color when first exposed, so when they're like actually taken out of the ground, they're not citrine colored. And we're back to geology science real quick. And what I wanted to bring up here is they start off by telling you citrine is a yellow to brownish variety of quartz, which is a mineral composed of silicon and oxygen atoms. It is one of the most popular and affordable gemstones. That's the part I have beef with, I guess you could say, because natural citrine is not one of the most affordable, nor is it one of the most readily available gemstones. It's not even a gemstone, it's a semi-precious stone. And it's a crystal, and that's what I have issue with here is them saying that shows you just how much these large jewelers have spread these lies, because they're not even talking about yet how citrine is baked amethyst. They're just saying it's widespread and readily available and super affordable, and natural citrine is none of those things. um and so their reflection here is taken from their knowledge of the fact that like jewelers have lots of citrine, fake citrine, that they're able to sell you because there's so much amethyst that they can readily bake and then cut and facet and put in jewelry and sell to you, that it makes citrine look available and affordable because amethyst is so much cheaper since it's just more available. So this sentence really like paints the picture of the fact that what all these jewelers have been lying about for so long is now widely accepted and normalized, and I think that it's time to bring awareness the other way and kind of like push back if you really want genuine crystals, because eventually, if this trend keeps up, people won't understand there was real citrine to begin with. They'll think that like the citrine that comes out of the ground that's natural is just amethyst that already got heated up before you took it out of the ground. And I think that that's really sad that we could like lose our understanding of a crystal that has like good energy and metaphysical properties just because corporate greed said it's advantageous for us to fake it and then tell everyone that it's real. Just to give you an idea, because I said I would give dates and some times to put all of this into perspective, I wanted to talk about Columbia Gem House here, and I wanted to talk about their fire citrine, which yes is like reserved. It's a whole specialized product that they have. So they'll tell you here on their website that fire citrine is a rare orange red citrine mined only in a specific mine in Brazil. And the mine was first discovered in the 1960s, just to give you like a timestamp here. So if we scroll down here on their website, they have this question: is the material typically enhanced in any way? And it says it's common to heat the crystals before cutting them to intensify the orange color. So they're literally taking something else and they're baking it to get it to be citrine colored. That's what they're doing. And they're saying it like it's citrine from the second you take it out of the ground. Look at this. Citrine is pinkish red when it's first exposed. So they're just telling you it's citrine from beginning to end, which is what we've seen with like all these other jewelers who say, yeah, citrine comes from amethyst and sometimes smoky quartz. And that's not what citrine is. That's not real citrine at all. um, and then they tell you about how heat treating is like stable and you don't have to do any upkeep or whatever. It's fine. And here's an important part though. So they say we have an in-house heat treatment process that we do ourselves, which means we can guarantee that the treatment is heat only. So what they're saying here is that they're the only one that touched the crystals that come out of this mine. No one else gets to see them. They bring them to their own privatized warehouse where they do the heat treatment themselves so that they can regulate it, so that all of their crystals end up looking like citrine, and then they sell them as citrine even though that's in no way what they are. Like they actually reserved the name of a fake as citrine, and now it's like a whole thing, and this is a sought after product because everyone thinks it's real citrine. Like this is so misleading and disingenuous. It's wild. And they've been doing this for a long time. Like this mine is from the 1960s, and they've like bought it for that long. So that's now, when am I filming this video? 2024. So they've been doing this for 80 years. They've been selling fake citrine and talking about how it's real. Now, they don't say it's purple when it comes out of the mine. They say it's a pinkish red color. And I mean, I haven't visited their warehouses. If they want to send me and like prove me wrong and tell me it's real citrine, I would be so down for that. But because I'm not here to slander anyone, I'm just here to say like we shouldn't lie about a crystal, because like for those of us who are interested in having the real deal, we're not going to get it, and we're not going to get the gains from that if we're actually interested in the energy that these crystals can give off and help us with. I have a couple things that I want to say though. I think if this was actually citrine, if they actually found a pinkish to red version of citrine, that would be so expensive and sought after, because citrine itself is like so rare and sought after now. That's why there's so many fakes. But if you found a pink variety of it, that would be even more rare and more expensive. And there's no way a crystal company who has the exclusive rights to a mine that would have a rare breed of citrine no one else knew about would possibly not sell it as this rare breed of citrine you can't get anywhere else. It'd be like with Larimar. Larimar is really expensive because there's only one place you can get it, and it's really dangerous to go get it, so there's expenses that go into that. But it's like sought after because it is like a rarity. So there's no way you could tell me I have pink citrine but no one wants it, so I bake it and turn it into normal colored citrine. Like you cannot convince me of this. What I suspect is that we know when we heat up amethyst, it turns into this like ambery orange color that's been established, forthright by other jewelers and other resources and a whole scientific paper. So what I suspect is that these guys are using low quality amethyst, because amethyst has a grading scale. I'll show you it in a second. And for the longest time, low quality amethyst was not purple. It was shades of like pale purple or gray and sometimes even pink. And then pink amethyst was released to the market at some point, fairly recently actually, and it took off. Like everyone loved it. And so now pink amethyst has become its own sought after variety of amethyst, to the point where it has its own grading system, and it's in a lot of cases more expensive than normal amethyst if you go to like gem shows and you want to buy specimens of it. So I want to unpack that real quick, because I think these guys bought a pink amethyst mine because when they did that back in the 1960s and no one wanted pink amethyst, they weren't just getting cheap amethyst to sell as really expensive citrine. They were getting the cheapest version of amethyst to sell as citrine, which like boosted their profit margins even more. So they bought out like the whole mine so they could like monopolize this. And there's also a chance that like the pink amethyst may give these more of like that reddish hue in there, because the pink that comes from the amethyst is the iron being bound in a different way, so it might like react differently when it's heated. But that doesn't change the fact that these guys have lied about a product for 80 years and normalized it with all these other big jewelers, and are just like wanting all of us to believe that citrine isn't actually a natural crystal. And if they admit citrine's a natural crystal that comes out of the ground the color it is, they want to tell you that the baked version of amethyst is better. And it's causing like so much confusion from all these other people that are trying to like be genuine, that so many people are getting screwed over, and they're not getting the citrine that they intend to use for energetic practices, so they're not even getting what they paid for. Like they're buying a hammer instead of a screwdriver, and it's just it's ridiculous. So let's finish unpacking this real quick. So I have this website here. This is from the Spiritual Gemologist, and it's talking just about some pink stuff. So we're gonna go just to the pink amethyst section here to start giving us background. Here's an idea of what pink amethyst can look like. Same structure as amethyst across the board. It just has a different color to it. And when I talked about it being fairly recent, it really is fairly recent. Not a lot of attention was paid to it, like many decades ago, if at all. So a lot of the hype from Pink Amethyst at the time of filming this is relatively new. What makes Pink Amethyst pink is that the iron is bound in a different way. So when the iron is in the amethyst, we talked about the iron being bound to the oxygen, and then when you heat it up, you can deoxidize it, and then it'll go from like the purple to yellow. So in normal amethyst, that purple color is from iron being bound to oxygen at low temperatures. Here, the iron comes in the form of hematite, so it's not able to bind to the oxygen the right way, and the hematite itself has a reddish hue. So when that's dispersed throughout the pink amethyst diffusely, you get something that's pink. It's not showing up as like, a bright red. And pink amethyst can actually have like a spectrum of slightly different varieties in their pink depending on like how much hematite there is. And you can see that between this picture and this one over here. So I told you that I wanted to mention there is like a grading scale for those who aren't familiar with it and are curious. So right now we're at withclarity.com. We're looking at one of their blogs, and they're talking about amethyst grading. Now, when we talk about amethyst grading, it's graded on like the color saturation, the color itself, and the clarity. If it has like imperfections or inclusions, and they show you some of the stuff here if you want to like explore this website. Here they tell you there's quadruple A grade, there's triple A, there's double A, and then there's A to B, and they give you like this example here about how it works. So the richer and deeper and darker the colors, the higher the grade generally. And then the less purple you get, the lower the color. So originally, uh, amethyst that wasn't purple was considered like a very low grade. So my suspicions was that the jeweler bought out a pink amethyst mine because it was so much cheaper, because back then nobody paid any mind to pink amethyst. They just thought it was like really, really poor quality. So my next reference is this Healing Crystals company. They have a blog that was updated just last year on pink amethyst. So this is a good representation of what they look like because it's amethyst. It's gonna have the same structures as you would find with the purple ones. So these ones have more of like that geode shape to them. I wanted to end by talking a little bit more about what we can do as far as identifying these fake heated amethysts versus actual citrines. And I have a couple articles here that talk about hope, I guess, and that if you take a piece or like a faceted jewel you have to someone who knows what they're doing, like a professional gemologist, they may be able to help you understand if it's the real deal, if it's citrine, or if it's heated smoky quartz or amethyst. So I'm not going to read this whole article for you from Science Direct, but the conclusion here talks about how they were able to, using like light analysis in terms of refractions and the way that light actually passes through these things. The specific equipment they used to measure this allowed them to identify 2 synthetic citrines, 3 heat treated citrines from 27 natural citrines. So by utilizing a specific spectrum of light when they were doing this, they were able to separate out the heat treated ones from the natural ones. So if you're really curious about if a piece or some jewelry you have is legitimate or not, you can do that. I think for for the raw stones though, it's a little bit easier to see. But you know, if this is something you're really worried about, there are techniques that professionals can use to help you out. Once again, we're back to the Amethyst Goddess blog that she has on Real versus Fake Citrine. So this first image is questionable, right, at best, because it's growing in like these large clusters that citrine doesn't grow in, and there's like white roots. So you can steer away from things like that, even though it is more of like a smoky color. It's likely not actually citrine, right? Here's another example. So you got the colored ends and the white roots, likely not citrine. And then down here we have the glass we looked at earlier, but what I really wanted to talk about is at the bottom of her blog, she shows some really nice pictures of actual verified like natural citrine. So they're a lot more toned down as far as color and color saturation goes. So they're more clear, they're more cool, they're more muted, and there are different varieties depending on like what mine and where in the world you get them, because the impurities that give them their color will change depending on where they're sourced. So these ones are a little more clear, but a little bit like smokier. Their color looks a little more brown when you can see through the crystal like quite clearly here. This one is a lot less saturated with color. It's basically clear, but you can see, and in person it would be easier to see, there's a little bit of like a smokier hue to it. This is another citrine that's a lot more on the clear end, and even though it does get slightly more opaque looking at the bottom, that's just probably because the point widens out, but there's not like an actual white root down there. Okay, we're bringing it full circle back to mindat.org. And what we're doing here is on their citrine page, which we kind of looked at, if you, hopefully it's really clear what genuine citrine looks like versus the heated amethyst in terms of coloring now, because none of these are that same level of like orange or amber. But if we go down slightly on their page, they have a couple things here. So there's a comparison of amethyst versus the baked amethyst, which we kind of covered. And then in the middle here, so they have citrine and they have amethyst. And then on the left over here, they have the heated amethyst already, and they baked all of those at 380 degrees Celsius, which for amethyst isn't that hot. But what you'll see is that the citrine actually clears out pretty significantly here. And the purple colorings on the amethyst do transition into like that gold that we've seen before. So what they're showing here is that the differences in the iron actually cause the crystals to heat differently. So if someone says heated citrine, just like we saw with all the jewelers using that term, it does mean they're baking amethyst, because if you heat citrine, it doesn't have a rich color to it anymore. So it's like, this is kind of one of those points where it's very apparent that when someone says heated citrine, they're lying about it being citrine. Or they're taking that term from someone that lied about it and they don't understand because it's been like so normalized. And it's just something to be aware of, that if you do want genuine citrine for the properties it has, heated citrine will not give that to you unless it looks like this, which they don't. I haven't seen it. The other thing I want to mention here is that this is something a professional can do for you, but it talks about dichroism, which is where if you have light that passes through a crystal or an object different directions, so it has to be like linear light in a straight line, but if you have light pass through crystals in different directions, you can actually determine whether or not the light that passes through is changing like the color that the crystal gives off. So the crystal's like reacting with the light in a certain way. I'm not going to get into the specifics, but what I will tell you is that some of these fakes don't exhibit the same properties as citrine does. For these images here from the publication that they're referencing, what they're telling you is that the amethyst shows no dichroism when you have that polarized light, so that light that is going certain directions, whereas natural citrine will. So this is one thing that a professional can do for you to determine if you do have a genuine piece of citrine or if it's heated amethyst. And again, I think in most cases for raw crystals and crystal specimens, your best judgment is enough to help determine this. But if you have a piece that's like really tricky to figure out and you really want to be certain, there are professionals that you can have help you with this. That being said, just because a piece does show dichroism doesn't mean that it is citrine, because other crystals can do that too. One of which being smoky quartz. Sometimes smoky quartz is going to be harder to differentiate um, from from citrine, and that's why this topic would take a lot more digging. And it's most likely, if you're really confused about whether or not you have the smoky quartz or the citrine, it would be best to go to a professional or an expert that you trust for this. So that is what I have for you on citrine and the different fakes out there. Those have been used in the past, present, and will maybe come back again in the future. I hope that this was helpful and it will serve as a good resource moving forward. I don't have any citrine in my store right now, but you know, if I have it in the future, I can say with really good confidence that it will be genuine, because buying the fake stuff, like the thought of it irks me. And if I do get heated amethyst for whatever reason, you know, if there are individuals out there that they like the aesthetic better, or for them they're sensitive enough to feel the difference in properties between the purple and the gold, it will be appropriately labeled as golden heat treated amethyst. So I hope that, you know, moving forward, awareness will be brought to this situation and it will become more transparent, and everyone will be aware of the fact that heat treated amethyst is not genuine citrine, and hopefully this situation can be reversed just from having awareness brought to it. But yeah, that's all I have for you today. So I hope you have a great day. I hope this was fun, and I'll see you in a brand new video.